Hi there, and welcome to this edition of Capital Update. I'm Randy Gilbert, and today we have both the Senator and the representatives from 33 to talk about things happening up in St. Paul. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Randy.
Welcome. Jerry and I have a nice little joke with the German because I spent some time in Germany for work quite a bit, so welcome back.
Yeah, guten Tag.
Yeah. Hey, thank you all for being here again. It's crazy how fast 3 months have passed. We had you on just after everyone was elected and seated. And 3 months have passed, and I'm just going to start off with this. I'm kind of amazed that we don't have a budget yet. 3 months, and we have a lot of work to get done. We only have less than 40 days to get done, and we don't have a budget. Representative Hertaus, I'd like to start with you and just say, why don't we have a budget yet?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Randy. I don't know why we don't have a budget yet. Most of us, with regard to our own families, we have some sense of an idea of how much money we have to work with before we go out and make spending decisions. Unfortunately, the committees that I've been assigned to, they've spent all of the time so far really talking about a wish list of everything that they would like to get accomplished. So rather than tax and spend, they're spending and then going to figure out how much taxes they have to raise to complete their wish list. That's kind of what I see going on.
That's crazy. So, Representative Pugh, I mean, what are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's a question that our constituents are really asking as well. You know, we haven't even heard one of the omnibus bills yet in the House. In fact, several of them haven't even been released. And, you know, here we are almost on tax day, and our constituents are wondering, you know, what it's going to look like. They know that, there are so many moving parts with regard to the tax situation, and they know it isn't going to end well. So I don't know. That's really a good question. I serve on the Civil Law Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and Government Operations, and we have heard so many bills that aren't specific to the budget. I really don't have an answer for that. We're just anxiously awaiting the review of these omnibus bills so that we can weigh in.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Senator, we're 40 days away. Are you concerned that we don't have a budget yet?
I am, Randy. We are on Monday taking up the first omnibus. So between the two chambers, we're taking up the very first one. We are in my transportation and public safety. We're still working on the omnibus bill, and I think part of the problem that we have is that there's so many ideas on how much taxes we're going to get from people. Are we going to be taxing business to business? Are we not? Are we going to be taxing clothing? Are we not? There's so many different problems in identifying how much money are we going to have. It's sort of hard to budget for yourself when you don't know how much money is in the pot. So I think the problem we have is we don't know how much money it is, and then it's deciding on how to spend it. So thankfully the first omnibus is coming up, although Senate File 1589 has some very, very problematic pieces to it that I'll be dealing with on the floor on Monday.
All right. Will we get it done? 40 days.
Yes.
We'll get it done. So I do have one question I'm going to ask Representative Hertaus, and we'll move on to the next question. They just released the numbers yesterday that shows that, once again, we brought in more revenue than was anticipated, which we're not going to get the credit for it, we as a Republican, but that is still Republican policy from the last session in place. Do you have a prediction what will happen after this budget gets passed and what will happen to Minnesota's economy?
Well, it's hard to really know because, again, the governor started out with, and I'll give him credit for at least laying out a vision or a goal. I mean, we got to start somewhere. And so to that end, you know, he did that, but it was very aggressive, and it was maybe predicated on some predictions that there was going to be quite a bit of a deficit. From the time the rhetoric of the first budget came out, the governor went public with it. It became hugely unpopular. He met with chambers of commerce out on this side of town and a few other business organizations, as well as a lot of consumer protest, and he's quickly retreated from that. So on one hand, there was a signal that was sent to the committees and all the chairs about all the money we're going to be raising to spend, and then he's kind of had to retreat from that. So they've still continued on the path that they originally started with in terms of being able to figure out how much money they're going to spend. It is good news, as you've mentioned. Some of the policies that the last majority had put in place for the last 2 years has actually transformed Minnesota's economy. We're doing much better than the rest of the nation. There's 55,000 new jobs. Business filings have been created, and the revenue projections are actually starting to show that it was working and that a growing economy generates more taxes. So what started out to be a $2.4 billion deficit has already been reduced down to $627 million. And it's certainly not necessary to be raising the amount of taxes and taking it out of the private sector that has been advocated for by this majority.
Well, my projection is in 2 years or in a year when all their policies hit, that we'll be in a shortcoming situation where they're going to have to think about raising taxes again, which just does not make me happy. We're going to move off the budget for a little bit. I know it's a budget year, which means that it shouldn't be a bonding year. And yet all I can hear about lately is all the bonds that are coming through for Rochester and infrastructure and trails and a bunch of different things. Senator, why don't I start with you? What is the amount that they're proposing right now? Where do you think it'll end up, and how do you feel about this?
Well, so far, Randy, we've got approximately $2.9 billion worth of
Billion.
proposals.
Billion.
Billion with
Billion.
a capital B,
Yes.
which would be a record setter by far. Right now,
In a
I believe-
non-bonding year.
Exactly. Right now, I think the proposal on the House side is someplace within $800 million. The Senate side, we haven't really seen the firm number on that one yet. And in one of my committees, we've actually heard enough trails to make you really disappointed in how many trails we're going to. And I'm a guy who likes trails. I like the new trail that goes down the middle of Lake Minnetonka. It's actually very, very popular. But we've got trails going everywhere, and we've got a very serious spending problem, and that adds up when you get to $2.9 billion. When you have a lot of initiatives, you need to prioritize what you have. And unfortunately, I think right now, because of the dynamics that are there, it almost seems like a feeding frenzy, and we need to restrain ourselves from going into places that government shouldn't.
Okay. So, Representative, we put these bonds in place, and it will be a record bond this year. I mean, this is a bonding bill. I just can't see how it's not going to be. How do you think that's going to affect budgets going forward, and how do you feel about that?
Well, I think the number in the House is well over $800 million. And again, I mean, this is not a bonding year. The one project that I, from the very onset, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I've had an interest in, but it certainly doesn't need to be in the bonding bill, is the restoration of the Capitol. There's I think we have a commitment to the legacy of maintaining the history of our Capitol, and that will require over $100 million. But we also have a voter-supported legacy amendment, the tax that's been hardwired into our Constitution. And there would most definitely be enough money there to focus and dedicate it toward the Capitol. But that wasn't something that the committee considered.
This current committee?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, I'm not really interested in taking a look or even giving consideration. I know that there is a lot in there that is just really unnecessary. And again, this is not a bonding year. We need to get serious and get our budget done. We need to balance our budget before we look to borrow more money.
Sure. Representative, I was going to make the comment that Cindy just made.
Well, yeah, thank you. And really what Cindy mentioned is so true. We shouldn't really be looking at the credit card right now. That's what bonding is. For some reason, people think that that's not real money. The problem is that we're at about 75 or 80% of our state's bonding capacity.
Right.
And so as we continue to borrow more money and run up the credit card, we're paying a lot of interest on that money that is taking away valuable resources to get things done. Now we're displacing the general fund budget to make interest payments, which should be used for other purposes of government. So with the bonding proposals that are there, I think we need to see how we're coming out of this recession and what the forecast would be. And I think it's advantageous to postpone talking about bonding until maybe even in next year, which is traditionally the way we would do it.
Bonding year. Yeah. So you said 70%. I'm going to put you on the spot. This bonding bill, if passed somewhere between what we'd like to see it passed and what they're proposing, what does that change that percentage from 70 to 75 to 80?
Well, as you heard Senator Osmek mention, $2.9 billion of total bonding requests, that would put us over our limit. And certainly with regard to some of the very unconventional notions that the state should get involved in a TIF-like bonding proposal for Mayo Clinic is another huge tab on the credit card. This is is actually taking the good faith and credit of the state of Minnesota and using up that credit for one specific region that is being targeted. Now, I heard this morning that the Mayo has actually taken that off the table.
The Mayo asked for it to be taken off?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're actually looking at a different way of still pursuing their desire to make that a world-class destination in terms of healthcare. But to Mayo's credit, I think they already are a world-class destination.
Well, I will make this comment. As a past mayor, the words TIF make me just cringe. It's a Robin Hood thing as far as I'm concerned, where we're taking away from the next 30 years or 15 years, depending on the terms of that TIF, to do a project today that I'm not for that. If we're going to do it, it should be one for one and figure it out if we're going to borrow at all. And I'm not opposed to some borrowing, because I do believe there's some good borrowing for some very good projects out there. And now the rates are reasonable, very reasonable, and it makes some sense, but enough of me.
One concern that I have with the bonding, just to sort of finish up the topic, is that some projects are being used as wedges to develop additional votes because they need to have a supermajority to get that bonding through. And we're seeing some proposals in certain locations to try and drag certain votes. That's not the way we should be bonding. We should be bonding based on what we believe is right for Minnesotans, not because you want to have a vote in St. Cloud or a couple of votes from Rochester.
I actually wish we had a list of priorities about here's what we need. Our CIP plan for Minnesota is these 100 projects, and we'll decide which is number 1, 2, 3 through 10 in any given year, because that would change based on the given year and economy and such. Yeah. Representative Pugh, I want to come to you for a moment. Each of you sit on committees, and I want to ask you to pick a committee that you're sitting on and talk about something that's going on and that you think our viewers should be aware of.
Well, I will. I'd like to speak to government operations. That's a committee that hears every bill in which the legislation proposes a committee, creating a committee, a commission, a work group. And what we've witnessed in government operations is the further growth of government. And as I've mentioned, I'm concerned already about the size of our state government. Minnesota is the #1 employer in the state of Minnesota. And the notion that we would be expanding our footprint is very, very concerning. One other thing that I would mention, actually two, we heard a bill this past week that I just could not believe. I mean, one of the areas of focus of mine is to look for ways to make government more transparent and more accessible. People really wonder where are we spending all of this money, and really how are these being utilized? Well, there was a bill introduced and it passed out of committee with no Republican votes to sunset something called the Sunset Commission. And this Sunset Commission, in fact, is there for a reason to actually, by legislation, by statute, come back in and say, is the purpose of this commission, this work group, this committee, is it done? And there's an end date. And we are looking to pull the curtains, shut the blinds from the public so that they can't see in to really what is going on. And I think that is just very concerning.
That is terrible. Now, Representative, I'm going to have you hold up. We're going to go to break here, and when you come back, I'll let you finish up, because you have another point that you're going to make different.
I do. I have another something that I want to
Perfect. So
alert
don't lose that
folks
thought.
to. Thank you.
So we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be back in a moment. Thank you for joining us.
My cell phone number and John's cell phone number. Hey, pretty. And number of the restaurant where we're going to be. And I've left you my pager number too, just in case, because you never know. John, you have the gift?
The odds of a babysitter calling 911, 1 in 1,400.
If anything should happen, please don't hesitate.
The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism, 1 in 150. You know the odds of autism. Now learn the signs. Go to autismspeaks.org.
Welcome back. When we went to break, Representative Pugh was talking about one of her committees, and we're going to come back to you, Representative, and let you finish your thought that you were going on.
Thanks, Randy. Well, it's government operations again, and one of the bills that came through there that's very concerning, and I'm certain will be concerning to a lot of people listening, is the forced unionization of in-home daycare providers and in-home personal care attendants. And the degree to which this legislation was jammed through committee, against the will of the people was really shocking. There were testifiers that came in who are small business owners. We're talking about unionizing, the potential of unionizing small business owners. And so that really, just the thought of that really takes some digesting. But so that's really what I'll say, is I wanted to alert everyone to that, that this is very, very concerning, the tack that this legislative majority is taking.
And that passed the House, correct?
Actually, it passed our committee. And yes, it passed our committee, and we did protest this and how this was jammed through with against the will of the people again, as I mentioned. And it will be coming to the floor. It hasn't yet for a vote, but we're going to be ready for that. And
well, I'm sure it'll be,
what we
in
have,
the papers.
Yes, what we have in the minority is we have our voice, and so we will definitely be speaking up on behalf of our constituents.
And we'll talk about the voice here a little bit later in the
Very
show,
good.
because I'm not certain that we have the voice that we think that we have as a minority people.
Thank you.
Representative Hertaus, what committee would you like to talk about and what topic?
Well, of the three I serve on, I would say probably education, and that's a big deal out here in our district. We've got so many school districts that are served with state aid from the state of Minnesota. You know, about almost 50 cents of every general fund dollar is spent on education, and we're looking at about $15.7 billion are going to be spent over this next 2 years. Now, of the Finance Committee that I serve on, some of the proposals that are coming out of there will be great news with regard to the schools. Equity and funding for some of the smaller school districts is going to see quite a bit of progress there, better than the governor was proposing. The governor was proposing about $52 of general ed formula improvement. Over the next 2 years, there'll be about $209 of improvement. So
Per
this
pupil.
is per pupil unit.
Yes.
Also, one of the things that has been advocated for and that the majority has put into place, a commitment of $105 million expansion of education into all-day kindergarten and early childhood development. 105 for all-day K, and then another 40 or $50 million for scholarships to families who would need assistance to put their kids in early childhood. So that's kind of some of the highlights that have come out of the Education Committee. And in one respect, it's encouraging to see that there's a commitment to do better for the kids. I'm a little concerned about the reach of what we're doing with all-day K. There just isn't all the conclusive evidence to support the notion, and it's been highly touted that early childhood investments save in special ed later on. But we don't know that as an absolute, because in the actual testimony that we heard, the studies were more limited to individual cases and not really a broad analysis of these findings.
Interesting. So that'll be coming to the floor as well then?
Well, the omnibus bill for finance was finished this morning.
Okay.
So that actually will be going to tax committee and probably hitting the floor. And for the House, most of our committees are now winding down. And we will have a session now every day of the week, starting next week, except Sundays, moving forward.
Well, I said it from the onset, but thank you all for the work that you do. It's more than full time right now when I hear the schedules that you all are pulling right now. So,
Thank you.
Senator.
I'm on transportation and public safety. There's a couple of different bills in there that are rather interesting. One of them was presented a little bit earlier. It was to provide or to allow illegal immigrants to receive driver's licenses the same as you and I would have. That one was rather controversial. It passed on a party line vote, and I just don't see that hardworking Minnesotans really believe that that's the right way to go for our future. There's so many loopholes. There's so many things that we use driver's licenses for. We use it for motor voter registration for voting. We use it for documentation for getting jobs or for the I-9 forms, and we also use it for getting a passport, which shows your citizenship. So that is currently still going through the legislature. The other component is the omnibus bill that we're working on transportation. And last Wednesday we heard the bill for the first time, and one of the more disturbing parts was that the Metropolitan Council had some funding restored, which, okay, if they took a cut last time, they're getting some funding restored. But they funded 100% of their appropriation request, which was $51 million worth of increases. At the same time, they took out the BCA money for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is for the criminal history database, for fingerprinting technology, for those things that we use for background checks. I think all three of us agree here that we need to have as robust 21st century background check system as we can possibly have so that criminals and mentally ill don't get access to guns. All of that money has been eliminated. All of this 20-year-old database is going to still remain in place. I don't know about you, but technology has changed so much in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, we had cell phones that looked like Buicks. Now, we have very small credit card size ones. We need to have a 21st century database so that we can protect our schools, our children, and ourselves from making sure that criminals don't get access legally to guns. We can do a better job. We just have to prioritize what we're doing, and I think this is the wrong priority.
So what confuses me about that, or concerns me is probably the better adjective, is that we've heard the gun bills both on the state level and the federal level, and this conversation has been part of it, that we have to do a better job with this. So why would the House and Senate, who's in control of our government right now, why would they not want to have this money in there to do exactly that?
It's very confusing. And my question to the committee chair and to the members of the committee was, why can't we give Metropolitan Council 85% of what they're asking for? We can use the other 15% to fund getting these systems upgraded to up to snuff so that we can do things. The fingerprint technology is electronic fingerprinting,
right,
where they can immediately test to make sure that the person shouldn't be getting access to those, to guns. That's something that I would have thought was bipartisan, that everybody believed in, but apparently maybe that's not true.
It'll be interesting to hear, and I use that term loosely as well, what happens with this, because I just, with all the conversation, I would have thought they would want to do anything and everything that was easy to try and make, guns safer, if that's their concern. So, which it is. We hear that all the time. I want to get off topic here a little bit, but it is on topic. But there's been an overture to this whole thing. Back in October, I had the three of you in here with your counterparts, and we did a show that we got to hear from both sides about why they wanted to be elected for these seats. You three prevailed, but one of the things that I heard from each of your counterparts was that they wanted to work with the other side. They wanted to make government work better, and they wanted to have more cooperation. That's summing it up. Each of them said it differently, but I heard that. And honestly, from our conversations today, our conversations that each of us have had over the last 3 and 4 months, and what we're reading in the paper, I don't feel like that's happening. Jerry, I'm going to start with you and say, do you believe that there's some cooperation going on? Is this government working the way it should be?
Well, I certainly do believe that there is cooperation, and that it's very easy to go ahead and establish bonds and relationships with members of the other side. They all have ideas, and we need to share them and find and pursue that goal. And I think our caucus has largely been doing that. When those statements were made last fall, Randy, I don't believe that they necessarily believed that things were going to turn out the way they did with regard to the election. But the fact of the matter is that now that they have a supermajority, and the majority is what it is, there really is not the cooperation that they said was such an imperative. What we've seen in committees, as Cindy has alluded to, is really an abuse of rules. They've adopted rules. 140 years of tradition in the House of Representatives has been changed under their majority, and we no longer have the ability on the floor during the spirit of good debate, when an epiphany of a good idea may arise. We're not able to offer an amendment, an oral amendment, anything like that on the floor of the House or even in committee. Everything has to be pre-filed. And this creates some real obstacles when you're going to have a hearing on Monday and you have a deadline of Friday noon. When a lot of this stuff gets posted over the weekends, our constituents are emailing us and giving us great ideas and informing us of how this impacts them. And when we get that information over the weekend, we're absolutely got our hands tied behind our back because we can't offer their good ideas. Our constituents, we can't offer it as an amendment on the floor.
So, Cindy, I see you chomping here.
Yes. Well, I'm agreeing with everything that Jerry just said, and I can just feel what he's saying. And this has been really maybe my greatest disappointment since I've been, a member of the legislature, that I came with every intent to look for ways to work collaboratively, not only, of course, with my own colleagues, but across the aisle. And it's very easy to build relationships, and I have done that. But to have our voice silenced by a rule that the majority has never levied on the minority in the history of our state, as Jerry said, over 140 years, I could not have imagined as a new legislator, what the consequence of that rule would have meant for my ability to represent my constituency. Like Jerry said, here we are on the floor or in committee, and we hear a testifier say whatever they say, and we have the legislation in front of us, which we've reviewed, and we can't, if an idea comes to mind as to how I could amend, I have to just let go of that idea, because it wasn't submitted and prepared by our reviser 24 hours in advance. And so in essence, the majority has silenced my 40,000, each of our House members, 40,000 constituents. And it's extremely frustrating and disheartening to receive an email from a constituent or have a conversation where someone is very passionate about a particular bill, and for me to say, I am so sorry, but there's nothing I can do about that at this point.
Okay.
That, needless to say, you can hear my passion about this.
So that's from the House. You both are, what I'm
Yes.
hearing you say is that while you build relationships, that working across the aisle is
Yes.
not truly happening. Senator?
I'm going to go from the glass is half full perspective, because the rules in the Senate are just a little bit different than the rules in the House. We don't require a second. We can ask for a roll call vote with just our own request. So I've actually found it that we are able to work together. Actually, I've developed relationships, even though some people in this area have said, Dave, you're too bullheaded, you're too stubborn, you're too much a Republican.
Which to the right.
Which
I'm sorry, Senator.
But there's some truth to that. I am very much strongly in the beliefs that I have.
Right.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't bring people to my side of the equation. I have many different bills that have Democrats on as co-authors. I have signed on to bills that there are co-authors on. One of the gun bills I signed on, an author was a Democrat, and I was the Republican on the bill. So it's not true that we don't work together, and actually behind the scenes, we do get some things done. However, there are times where the rubber meets the road, and there are times where caucus politics comes into play, and I've seen them in very blatant forms. I like the camaraderie that we have, and I actually have been able to work in committee in getting some tweaky amendments. One example is there's a bill to condense down soil districts and water districts when there's multiple ones that want to merge together. I was able to get the author to add on a reverse referendum, so that if there was a threshold, I have that as an amendment that's going to come up onto the Senate floor, that we can have a reverse referendum if those jurisdictions have enough people that sign a petition to say we don't want this. I think it's the thought of combining them might be the right thing to do, but you need to have a safeguard that protects the people when they realize that maybe this isn't the direction we want to go.
Okay.
So there are times.
We are running out of time. In fact, we're out of time. So I'm going to have to stop you, and I'm going to say, we're 40 days away from the budget and the bonding bills being into law for the year. So we should have you guys back here, within the next 2 months, and let's talk about what happened. I foresee issues coming down in that last week, and a lot of things that we are going to be surprised are going to get pushed through, and we're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and we're going to want to hear it firsthand from our representatives. So thank you all for showing up today.
Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
And your work that you're doing, your tireless work. So thank you all. And thank you for joining us today on the Capitol Update. We'll see you next time.